Welcome back, darlings, to the podcast. Life looks different now. I'm your host, Slandy Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we read from Genesis chapter 29. And from reading Genesis chapter 29, we learned that Laban, Jacob's uncle, tricked Jacob into marrying both of his daughters, Leah and Rachel. Now we know that Jacob always loved Leah and always loved Rachel, the younger sister, and I've always wanted to marry Rachel. In fact, he even made an agreement with Laban to serve Laban for 7 years to have the hand of Rachel in marriage. Yet Laban tricked him. Laban married him off to Leah first. But within a week period, Jacob also married Rachel, but he had to work another 7 years for Rachel. Now, this week, we are going to read Genesis chapter 30. Now, Genesis chapter 30 is a longer chapter. However, it has many lessons in it. So let's see what the lessons are in Genesis chapter 30. Now, before I go ahead to reading Genesis chapter 30, I have a favor to ask. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. As you and I are learning the Word of God, others want to do the same. Give them the gift of knowledge. And of course, you'll also be helping this channel to grow. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get on to reading Genesis chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I shall die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go in to her, so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went in to her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed." So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the fields and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you for my son's mandrakes. So he led with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have bore him six sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. As soon as Rachel had born Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I had served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now when I shall provide for my own household also. He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed all the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob pastures the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred and they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks. And so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart, and he did not put them with Laban's flock. Wherever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Fascinating chapter, Genesis chapter 30, because there's so much going on in this chapter, and there are so many lessons to be learned in this chapter. Yes, of course, you notice that I am smiling. And even when I was reading the chapter, I couldn't help myself but laugh at what was really going on, even though it was not a laughing matter, you know? It was really a tragedy. I mean, it is it's such a messy story. There's just so many things going on in this chapter. So let's just start by understanding what's really going on here. The chapter is really categorizing, sibling conflict, siblings rivalry between the two sisters, Leah and Rachel. Now, we have to remember that Jacob was tricked into marrying Leah, right? His father-in-law, Laban, tricked him into marrying Leah. He never intended on marrying Leah. Jacob never intended on having more than one wife. In fact, he only wanted to marry Rachel, and he served Laban for 7 years to marry this woman. And he was tricked into marrying the older sister Leah because apparently Leah was not as attractive as her younger sister Rachel. So she did not have much prospect. And her father was aware of that. So her father had to trick Jacob into marrying her. Hence why Jacob hated Leah. With good reasons. Even God noticed that Leah was hated. Hence why God opened up her womb and make sure that she had all these children, so at least she can be loved by her own children, right? She can feel the love, because she was never gonna feel any kind of love from her husband, you see? So it's quite understandable that why Jacob did not like Leah. It makes sense. And of course, we know that Jacob loved Rachel and would do anything for Rachel. And the chapter opened up with letting us know that Rachel was just envious. She was jealous of her sister. She hated the fact that her sister Leah had all these children and she herself didn't, because she was infertile. She was sterile. Her womb got shut, and God chose to do that to Rachel, right? So Rachel was hopeless. She declared to her husband Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." As if her husband has any kind of authority over this whole situation. I don't know where Rachel got the notion that it was her husband's, that her husband had that kind of authority, because we all know men do not have any authority over who can have children, who can't. Only God does. And so Jacob, of course, got very frustrated with Rachel. Even though he loved her, he was upset. He's like, who am I? Why would you expect me? Why would you bring that onto me? Why would you be asking something like that of me when you know that it is, God who gives children? It's really God's decision, not mine. Who am I? I'm just a mere mortal. I'm a man. I don't have that power. You see? So Rachel tried to correct the situation, and she made the same decision that her husband's grandmother had done. Now we have to remember, when Sarah, Abraham's wife, couldn't have children, she herself gave her servant Agar to her husband Abraham. Now we have to remember, Abraham and Sarah are Jacob's grandparents, right? And we see here that because there was tradition that when a married woman, a wife, couldn't have children, that she gives her servant to her husband to bear children for her, because we learned that when Sarah did it with Abraham, by giving the child Agar to Abraham to bear a child for them. So Rachel did exactly the same thing. So she gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob. And she said to Jacob, go on to this woman, because now she'll be a surrogate for me. Whatever children she bear will be my children. In some way, she feels like, okay, she'll become a mother that way. And so Rachel, gave her servant to her husband as a second wife. Now, we always have to remember that these servants did not have much right. So Rachel's servant had no autonomy. She didn't have a choice in the matter, because it was the custom of the time. The lady of the house made those decisions, and the servant had to suffer through it. So Jacob listened to his wife Rachel, just like Abraham listened to Sarah, his wife. They are not following God's orders. They're not following God's ways. They are being human in their own flesh, in their own weakness. They are making their own decisions and doing their own thing, deviating from God's will. Because you see, Jacob had no intention of having two wives anyway. But now, not only does he have two wives, now he's sleeping with the servants as well. And so Jacob listened to his wife and went in and slept with Rachel's servant Bilhah. Now, let me say it again. Jacob is a man, just like every other man. I don't know too many men who will say no to sleeping with another woman if his wife is okay with it. I'm just saying. That's just the reality. Most men will say, oh, sure, of course, forgetting all of the problems that are going to come with that. We have to remember that Jacob has experienced this whole situation firsthand, because his grandparents had made that same decision. So he's very well aware of his uncle Ishmael, how his uncle Ishmael came about. He's aware of the whole thing. He could have said, no, thank you, because remember, Jacob had already had two wives. He had already married two sisters. Craziness. This thing can get any more messy. Just messiness. All this shenanigan. So this man could have said, no, this is not a good idea. But he didn't, he just went with his flesh, like a typical, worldly man. And he went in and slept with the woman. Slept with the servant Bilhah, and she bore Jacob two sons. And Rachel named the boys after, according to the circumstances of her life, according to her feelings. She named the oldest child Dan, and she named the second child. What did she name the second child? She named the second child Naphtali, because she said she has wrestled with her sister and won. But one can but wonder, what exactly has she won here? The situation was already messy. She didn't win anything. In fact, now she has to worry about another woman sleeping with her husband. Now, not only was she concerned about the sister sleeping with her husband, now she has to be worried about now her servant sleeping with her husband. It's craziness. That whole mindset is insane. But listen to this. The whole situation get worse. Leah, then, who had stopped having children, maybe it's because her sister Rachel, because clearly Rachel has so much power over her husband, because her sister Rachel probably intervened, does not allow, the husband Jacob to sleep with the first wife, Leah. So now we learn that Leah stopped having children. And then she followed the younger sister's footstep. Followed the younger sister's example. She too went ahead and gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob to bear children for her. Now, do we see how crazy that is? I'm sure even in the time period they were living, that was messy. Because after all, Leah had children of her own. Leah had already given birth to 4 sons to Jacob. And it didn't matter how many children Leah was going to give to Jacob. Jacob was never going to love her because Jacob never liked her. But poor Leah. Now she went ahead and she gave her servant to her husband as well. Now 4 women are sharing 1 man. Craziness. It's a harem. It sure is. It's a harem. Like, you have 4 women with 1 man and they're passing this man around. This is crazy. Now I can't help to ask, like, where's the leadership? What is Jacob doing? I mean, is he so much so in his flesh that he can't stop and say, oh, this is a bad idea? All these women, like, I can see the rivalry between those 2 sisters and it's getting bad. Let me not just make this whole situation worse. And this man did not even think that way. He just went ahead and he slept with, Leah's servant. And that servant now bore them 2 more children, 2 more sons. And Leah named the first child Gad, meaning good fortune. I'm not sure what good fortune she got out of all this. Like, seriously. Would any of you ladies be comfortable with your husband sleeping with your servant or sleeping with other women to bear your children? Like, what is good fortune about this whole thing? It's insanity. And her servant bare another child, another son, and Leah named this child Asher, meaning happy am I. I'm not sure what Leah's happy about. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here, because I don't know how any woman will be happy, to see that her husband's having sex with other women and bearing all these children. But these women were so blinded by their own jealousy. They were so blinded by their own, anger with one another, that they couldn't really see eye to eye. They couldn't really see the situation that their father Laban had put them in. Their father is at fault here. He had put them in a dire situation, but they couldn't move past it, even though they were sisters. Because sisters often have have a little bit of hatred for one another. Some sisters are very much jealous of each other and even harm one another. It's really sad, but it does happen. And we can see it here, very clearly in Genesis chapter 30. These 2 sisters hate each other that much that not only were they, sleeping with that one man, now they have the rivalry was so terrible between the 2 of them. They were so much enthralled into their own feelings that they are now passing their husbands around to the servants. It's madness. And then the next thing we learn is that during the wheat harvest season, Reuben, Leah's oldest son, Leah and Jacob's oldest son, their first son, found some mandrakes in the field. So apparently mandrakes is some type of a herb, fertility herb that help women, because they believe at the time that it helped women to be fertile, to get pregnant. So Reuben found some of those mandrakes and he brought them to his mother. And upon hearing that, Rachel went to Leah and said to Leah, give me some of that mandrakes, because, Rachel cannot have children. She was barren. So she went to Leah asking the sister, may you please share some of that mandrakes with me? And Leah refused, of course. Leah was angry. She was like, wait a minute. Not only have you taken my husband, you have stolen my husband, now you're trying to steal my son's Mendrix? What do you think this is? So, of course, Leah is very upset with the whole situation because she's the first wife. Regardless if, whether or not her husband loves her, it's really irrelevant. She's the first wife and she's the one who has given him all these sons. So naturally, she's upset. She's like, you've already taken my husband. Because Leah's very well aware that Jacob loves Rachel. Okay? But that didn't stop her, from trying the best she can to get to win her husband's affection. But poor thing. Poor baby. It didn't matter what she was, she did. She was never going to earn, that means love. Because we don't earn people's love. It's either they love us or they don't. Sorry. I'm sorry to say it that way, but that's just the truth. And of course, Rachel being desperate because she wants to have children and she knows Mendrix can help. She didn't offer to let Jacob, her husband, their husband, to sleep with Leah that night in exchange for the Mendrix. Are we even, can you imagine this? Like, every time I read this chapter, I couldn't help but to shake my head in the whole situation. Now, Jacob's being passed around, and Leah agreed to having Jacob for the night for an exchange for her son's Mendrix. Poor Leah. Again, so desperate. These women are so desperate. One is desperate to have children. The other one is desperate to have her husband's affection, that they will do just about anything. And it's apparent that Rachel had great, power over her husband, great power over the whole family dynamic, because once again, she was able to just say, okay, you know what? Let me take the Mendrix and I'll let you sleep with our husband tonight. And the exchange took place. And Leah came out when Jacob is coming from the field and came out to him and said, listen here, I bought you for the night. I bought you with my son's Mendrix. So you're spending the night with me. You're not going to the second wife, Rachel. You're coming to me. Can you imagine how low these women's self-esteem must have been to put themselves in such a tight situation, such a deplorable situation? I know I'm viewing the whole situation from a mother woman's perspective. I know, but come on, even then, surely these women must have seen this is not normal. And there we learned that her husband, Jacob, went on to her. He went in and he gave her service. So much so that she got pregnant. Because we know that Leah is a very fertile woman. She got pregnant for him. And she bare another son. And then she got pregnant again. And then she bore another son. She bore two sons. And then she got pregnant again and bore a daughter, Dinah, for Jacob. And now we learned that Leah got 6 sons and a daughter. But even with all these births, even with all of these babies being born and all of these blessings, it never ended the rivalry between the two sisters. It is so sad. And then we learned that, of course, Rachel finally got her wishes. Maybe the Mendrix worked. In their mind, they're thinking, okay, well, I guess, this worked. But we know that it was because God opened Rachel's womb and allowed her to bear a son. And so she bore one child, Joseph, and finally when she got that child, she named him Joseph. And it's a beautiful thing because I can only imagine how, happy, how excited. I'm sure she was elated to finally have a son of her own, because her sister had all these babies and she finally got one of her own. So she named him Joseph because she really wanted God to open her womb and give her another son. Then the chapter took a turn. And then we learned that Jacob wanted to leave the service of his father-in-law Laban, the trickster. Because the father-in-law is the one who put Jacob in this position in the first place. But nevertheless, Jacob played his part. He played his role in all of this situation. He could have said, no, thank you, and just kept one wife. Or he could have just said, yes, let me do the 2 wives and be done with it. But he's the one who always putting himself in a pickle and have all these women and having all these babies. But anyway, I digressed. So the chapter took a turn, and now Jacob wants to, leave the service of his father-in-law Laban to return to his homeland, to return to his country, maybe to see his parents again, because he has been gone for so long, right? He has served 14 years plus all these babies being born. So that we're looking about, God knows, 20 something years that he's been in service for his father-in-law. And now he's like, I just want to be home. I want to take my wife. I want to take my children, all of my wives, all of my children, all of my servants, and I want to return home. Then we learned that Laban recognized that God had blessed him because of Jacob's presence. Laban is aware of that. He knew that he would not have had, so much wealth had it not been for his son-in-law staying with him and living with him and taking care of all of his flocks. So he said to Jacob, you can name your price. I want you to stay here and manage all of my assets. So name your wages, and it shall be so. It shall be given unto you. And Jacob said, I don't want you to give me anything, because you know very well that I've been working for you for all these years. I just want what I earned. I have earned it. I want that. And I will continue on managing things for you as long as you agree to this agreement. And then Jacob went on to say, he just wants to have all the speckled and spotted sheep and goats and all the black lambs and Laban's flocks. Now we have to remember, that was a very a minimum amount of a flock here that Jacob was demanding. And if you're looking at the terms, it seems very unusual, because Jacob could have asked for a flat fee. He could have asked for, his wages, a percentage of the amount of work he's done, a percentage of the wealth, of Laban's wealth, but he didn't. He simply said, you know what? I will do the work for you. I will manage them for you if you commit to giving me, to allowing me to have the speckled and spotted sheep and goats, and then having all the black sheep in that flock. And guess what? Laban agreed. But we have to remember that Laban is not an honest man. This man has many character flaws, okay? So all of us do. All of us have character flaws. None of us are perfect. But we know that Laban is not an honest man. There is nothing worse than a dishonest person. You see, because they don't care. They're only thinking, they're too selfish. They're only thinking of their well-being. So they'll do anything. They'll have their conniving ways to get whatever they want out of you. And they'll try to get everything for free. And that's what Laban was trying to do here. Although Laban agreed to the terms, and Jacob began to work for him, next thing we see here, Laban decided to remove all the spotted and speckled and striped, like goats and the sheeps, and then all the black lambs. He decided to remove them all, you see, and he took off, putting 3 days of distance between him and Jacob. He took off. He didn't give all the spotted animals, the speckled animals that he had agreed to allow Jacob to take, and pass them on to his sons, and left the whole scene. He put a 3-day distance between himself and Jacob, because that's who Laban is. Laban is not an honest man. Just like he tricked Jacob into marrying his daughters, he's just doing the same thing here. In his mind, he's thinking, you know what? I don't want Jacob to leave. I want to keep everything for myself. He's being greedy, selfish. It did it because he wanted to keep Jacob in poverty, of course. Because if Jacob is working for him and Jacob doesn't have much, Jacob will never leave. And we have to remember Jacob now has 4 wives and all these children. You see, and 11 children. And so he's just like, okay, well, let's just see what I can do here to keep him depending on me. So he will never be independent. He will never have a life of his own. And Jacob noticed that. And we learned that, that Jacob was like, okay, if this is what you're going to do, this is like, he then set up a plan. He set up a plan to now breed, all of Laban's, sheeps and goats and lambs, and started like a method to start breeding them. And he decided that he's in front of every time the animals will come to the water to drink water, in order to increase the number of the spotted and the striped and the speckled animals, he'll just like put a stick in front of the animals, right? In front of the sheep when they are breeding. And it would appear that there was the ancient people in the Bible believed that, when these sheep were being coupling, that their offspring could be influenced by the objects that were placed in front of them, in front of the animals. So if the animals were viewing like a speckled or a stripe or whatever type of object, that they will then breed more offspring that mimic that object. And so Jacob started, to place the sticks in front of the animals that were healthy and strong. So those that were weak, he did not do that. He left them for Laban. But those who were healthy and strong, he just placed it in front of them. Using this technique, his flock of striped and speckled and black sheep and goats grew significantly. But we have to remember that it wasn't the technique that really increased the amount of those animals that were being bred, that were being born. It was because God wanted to bless Jacob. You see, and Jacob knew that because God had already told him that wherever he goes, he's going to prosper. He's going to be blessed. So it was really God doing that work. Genetically speaking, whatever Jacob did was irrelevant. It was not influencing the animals at all. It was truly Jacob's faith. Jacob believed that God would bless him. Jacob believed that if he depended on God, God will take care of all of his needs and all of his family's needs. So he depended on God because Jacob was always having these dreams and God revealed all these things to him. So he knew that it was God's work and it was not even his own work. And once Laban noticed how Jacob was prospering, since there were now more striped and more speckled animals were being born, he now tried to change the terms, of this agreement indiscriminately. He changed the terms so many times because that's who Laban is. Laban is a trickster. He's not an honest man. But Jacob, as we can see here, overcame all of Laban's scheme. And he did not remain poor. He did not remain dependent on Laban because God was always going to be blessing Jacob, because Jacob now is the one who's carrying out the covenant that God had given to his grandfather Abraham. Jacob's dependence will be multiplying. His wealth will be multiplying. He'll be taking over the land of Canaan. So this chapter is really a beautiful chapter. There's so many things that I learned from this chapter. First, we have to realize that men don't have any power over fertility. We don't. God does. And we have to learn from this chapter here that It doesn't matter what we ever going to do. If a man does not like you, he does not like you. It doesn't matter how many times you sleep with him. It doesn't matter how many children you bore for this man. A man can have children with you and still hate you. The word of God is letting us know that. Genesis chapter 29 and 30 is letting us know. Ladies, don't lay with men who don't love and honor you. Don't sleep with them. Don't try to persuade them. Don't try to, trick them. Don't get pregnant for them. Don't do none of that. If a man doesn't like you, doesn't care about you, if a man hates you, there's really nothing you're ever going to do. And that is not going to stop that man from taking your goodies. If you are giving it to him, he's going to take it. And that is a lesson that pretty clearly that Leah did not know. She did not understand. She did not learn because she kept on sleeping with Jacob. She kept on bearing his children, desperately looking for him to love her. It's really sad. And we see it happening today in society, where people are encouraging women, girl, it's better to have a piece of a man than to have no man at all. Foolishness. It's foolishness. All of these women had a piece of a man. Even Rachel, whom Jacob clearly loved, she still had a piece of Jacob. She did not have all of Jacob because Jacob was sleeping with all of the other women, her sister included. So we need to stop selling ourselves short. Do not partake in these harem. Do not partake in this situation. Do not allow yourself to get so desperate to a point where you are sharing a man or having this idea that having a piece of a man is better than no man at all. It's absurd. And the chapter is clearly demonstrating this to us. These women mentalities it was just broken consciousness. It was brokenness. Do not allow yourself to be put in that position. And we also learned that, a trickster is always going to be a trickster. Laban is not an honest man. There's really nothing that Jacob was ever going to do. The fact that Jacob continued doing business with him is really sad because Jacob here is still not learning. Like, don't trust your father-in-law. But by the grace of God, we also learned that no matter what, when God decides to bless you, God has chosen you, you're always going to be blessed. It doesn't matter what humans try to do, what men try to do, doesn't matter how people try to trick and all of that. It's irrelevant. If you decide to depend on God and put your trust in God and you have faith in God, you will be blessed. Even if you're flawed. All of us are flawed. Flawed and all, with all our flaws, God will still bless you. So let me know what lesson you learned from this chapter this week. I want to hear from you. I hope that you'll be having a wonderful week, a productive week. I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you. Until next time, darlings, bisous.